Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and did you expect anything different from Michigan MAGA Republicans? Did you really expect anything different than Michigan MAGA Republicans following the example of their dear leaders regime and the bundles of campaign bribes they've accepted from Rick Snyder, Betsy DeVos, and other big-time elite and untouchable billionaires? Did you expect anything different? I mean, after doing nothing, and that's literally what happened in Lansing for most of the summer, nothing, MAGA man-baby Matt Hall, Michigan's Trump wannabe House Speaker, dropped an 800-page budget bill on the House floor and then forced the chamber to vote on it soon after. Oh, I long for the days of when there were bills like Obamacare in Congress some, 15 years ago, and MAGA Republicans back then, along with a dutiful following corporate press, complained how Democrats were rushing through a bill that had been debated for months and months. Oh, how I long for those days, because the political media in Lansing sorta yawns when Matt Hall unveils a budget affecting every single Michigander and forces House members to vote on it in the same length that it takes time to watch an hour-long feature on Netflix. And to no one's surprise, the MAGA Michigan Republican House bill is all about making people feel pain. Well, almost, actually. Matt Hall and the MAGA House claim that they were rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in the budget, trying to emulate that stalwart of all people, Elon Musk, who pillaged our country's backbone, and it turns out exposed our Social Security numbers to everyone out there before he slithered away after receiving massive tax cuts to him personally and his businesses. Yes, that's who Matt Hall and MAGA Michigan House members want to emulate. Isn't that just so nice? However, one place where Matt Hall and MAGA Michigan Republicans did not find an incident of waste, fraud, and abuse just happened to be, by dumb luck, in the state legislature. Oh, wow. Yes, they ensured they gave themselves a nice $2 million bump for next year. You see, because in their minds, after taking most of the summer off and Easter off and hunting season off and only passing a handful of bills, most of which were aimed at clobbering the working class, in their minds, they've earned it. You know who didn't earn it? Apparently you. Yeah. Matt Hall and the MAGA House are cutting $40 million in revenue sharing for cities and townships. You know how much that we've been talking about much needed infrastructure improvements throughout the state, and not just for roads, but also for new sewer systems, for example, or new pipes for clean water. Yeah, cities and townships, they rely on that money to help pay for such projects. A lot of that now is gone. Oh, and Matt Hall and the MAGA House are gutting $5 billion with a B, $5 billion from Governor Whitmer's proposed spending for health and human services. I mean, these cuts will be devastating for local hospitals, many of which are about to be in serious trouble after MAGA Republicans in Congress with dear leader signature passed the MAGA murder budget that cuts Medicaid spending. And that will ensure the closures of hundreds of hospitals across America, including some right here in Michigan, and those will most likely be in rural counties. Don't worry, though. Don't worry. Matt Hall says that his budget cuts won't hurt nearly as bad thanks to the awesome savings hundreds of thousands of Michiganders are getting by having their Medicaid ripped away and by forcing work requirements on them. And please don't forget how Matt Hall and MAGA Republicans, along with some Democrats who feared their own shadows, passed the bill last summer cutting the guaranteed minimum wage and paid sick leave raises that working class voters deserved and that they were supposed to receive. You see, they all work together to ensure, when in doubt, always screw the working class while helping the elite class, the corporate class, the oligarchy. See, that was a double gut punch from MAGA Republicans and from Matt Hall. And shame on those Democrats who went along with it. Now, in a very Trumpian move, Matt Hall and MAGA Republicans are also slashing Michigan Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel's budget by some $41 million. Of course they are. You see, Nessel's been suing the hell out of Dear Leader's authoritarian moves. Nessel sued Dear Leader and his regime 32 times, including the latest one where the Attorney General is suing the regime as it only wants to release $37 million in crime victim services already scheduled for Michigan. As long as Michigan does not impede or hinder the regime's kidnapping and deportation programs where they send undocumented people into concentration camps. And that hurts Michigan's economy, by the way, because a lot of undocumented workers pay taxes that we enjoy here in Michigan, and people are doing jobs that we here in Michigan really need. But MAGA Republicans, they love this kidnapping program because it erases brown people, and they love watching brown people and their families get ripped apart. It's not about crime. Now, I thought we are about fighting crime and helping the victims of crimes, Matt Hall, because withholding $37 million in crime victim services here in Michigan really kind of spells out you don't care about victims of crime. If you did, you wouldn't try to cut Dana Nessel's budget. That's trying to hold the Trump regime to account. But I guess you don't care about crime or victims of crime, Matt Hall. I guess since you're trying to defund Dana Nessel's office, you're doing it because she's hurting your dear leader's feelings. You see, states and local governments can't make up the difference here with that program, that $37 million for crime victim services. And it shows once again how little that Dear Leader Trump and MAGA Republicans and MAGA Michigan Republicans really care about law and order. Their first priority is always to protect the lawlessness of their dear leader. And I think it's safe to say they're very pleased with their dear leader's continued protection of a known child sex trafficker, which is why he won't release the Epstein files. Dear Leader is also a felon and also someone found liable for sexual assault. A true leader, a beautiful soul, an American man. Speaking of law and order, Matt Hall and the MAGA House are proposing slashing the budget for police by some $105 million. Paul Egan from the Detroit Free Press reports that this would result in the cutting of 433 police jobs. Now, some of this is because MAGA Republicans are upset with Michigan State Police Director James Grady, who hired a woman to be the deputy chief. Now, I'm not one to back the blue, no matter who or what, as you well know. And I want transparency in police departments and with our state police as much as anyone else. And I think it's wise for some Democrats in the House to call for more transparency into how state police funds are used and abused. And some Democrats have already joined in that call, and that's good. And if we find some savings, that's great as well. But I thought we were about putting more cops on the beat, MAGA. Defunding the police? Really, Matt Hall? Defunding the police? I cannot believe that is your strategy now. I mean, when people like me called for an accounting of all police departments, called for accountability in all police departments, called for the rooting out of corruption in all police departments, I and others were called anti-police and pro-criminal. And yet, defunding the police, that's exactly what you're doing here, Matt Hall. The budget also calls for an elimination of the state buying EV cars for its fleet, because nothing says Michigan than driving expensive, out-of-date gas-powered vehicles. Grrr. And the MAGA House budget also includes about $2 million in cuts for office spaces that are largely sitting around since some state employers are working from home some of the time. Fine, no problem with that. But to order state workers to have to drive to Lansing for 5 days a week when they can work from home, that's insane. I mean, they're saying, oh, look, there are some buildings not being used. We need to bring those workers here. Why? Most private businesses are doing the exact same thing where a lot of their workers are doing hybrid work where they can. Forcing state workers to drive to Lansing 5 days a week, I mean, again, that's insane. It's better for our roads that people aren't driving 5 days a week. It's better for the workers' mental health. It's better for family relationships. And it's better for the environment that people aren't traveling as much. Dumb. Oh, and the Matt Hall MAGA House budget also includes cuts to the Department of Civil Rights again. Are you surprised white Christian nationalist Republicans are attacking civil rights? And these cuts will lead to an end for funding for the Arab American National Museum, the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and the Holocaust Memorial Center in Farmington Hills. Wait, what? Now, cutting funding to the Holocaust Memorial Center? That's anti-Semitic. Well, I mean, that's what I'm told whenever I criticize Israel over its genocide in Gaza. But yet, here's Matt Hall and the MAGA Republicans proposing the cutting of money for the Holocaust Memorial Center, which reminds everyone of the history and horrors of how fascism and authoritarianism led to the genocide of Jewish people during World War II. Now, why do MAGA Republicans want to erase that kind of history again? I don't know. Anyway, the Matt Hall MAGA House budget is also gutting some 24% of spending for Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's office, and she, of course, is running for governor next year, but you see, they blame her for the 2020 loss. And these people are called the grown-ups, right? Matt Hall and MAGA Republicans say that these cuts are needed to raise money for road repairs. We could offer to raise taxes on the top 1% to help pay for our infrastructure here in the state and also for the infrastructure across the country. We could spend more on mass transit and rail so people aren't using roads and highways as much. We could end the billions and billions of dollars that we've spent on corporate welfare. We could be smart, but we choose to be dumb. Oh, and Simon D. Schuster in Bridge Magazine noted the following. This budget would also make various reductions in Medicaid spending, including a $21 million cut for adult dental service coverage. $21 million cut for adult dental service coverage? Democratic State Representative Alabas Farhad of Dearborn said that the plan would also cut more than $20 million for the MI Docs program, which provides tuition loan relief for physicians that work in underserved and impoverished communities. Farhad said, "I have to wonder who we are defending in this budget." Well, that's the point, I think. It's not a budget for working-class Michiganders or their families. These cuts are on top of the cuts from the MAGA murder budget, which is slashing food assistance funding for Michigan State Extension programs. All because they want to make sure that Elon Musk, Betsy DeVos, Rick Snyder, and Dear Leader himself can bask in more money. Before I forget, to prove to you how it's always been about the corruption in Lansing, there's this. The Matt Hall MAGA House budget calls for an end to the corporate slush fund known as the SOAR program. Okay, now that's somewhere where we can agree on something, I guess, since that corporate slush fund has been a disaster, as we have talked about a lot here on the show. But Simon Schuster notes the following little insertion in the budget. Listen to this. It would include $50 million for Wakefield Township to make infrastructure improvements for a controversial Upper Peninsula copper mine whose owners had sought a SOAR incentive. That's the copper mine that many around the shadow of the Porcupine Mountains are trying to stop. And yet, there are the MAGA Republicans once again doing whatever it takes to please their big business lobbyists. Kind of like they're doing with the Line 5 pipeline and the Straits of Mackinac. What a joke. They are not about the working class, and they aren't about the future of Michigan. Progressive Democratic State Representative Emily Devendorf posted the following on her social media about the Matt Hall MAGA House bill. She said, "It makes the daily lives and hardest moments of Michiganders' lives more difficult." Perfectly said. But it doesn't make House Republicans' lives harder since they've got nice jobs now, nice cushy jobs right now in Lansing, and then when their term limits are up, they will go lobby for whatever group financed their campaigns. Nice gig if you can get it, right? And of course, they'll lecture you about hard work and everything while supporting cuts to healthcare and food assistance, which is strange considering they tell you every day that Gretchen Whitmer is ruining the state. Interesting way of showing how you care about people living in such rough economic conditions by ripping away the safety social net. Of course, let's also not forget the MAGA Republican attack on marginalized Michiganders continues in this budget, like banning any state diversity, equity, and inclusion programs because, you see, MAGA believes white people by nature are always qualified over anyone else, or that any program helping provide equal opportunity is bad for white people. More on that later in a moment. Now, one Democrat in the House did vote for the bill, one. And it was none other than the Trump-loving MAGA wannabe Karen Whitsett from Detroit. Whitsett no longer caucuses with Democrats in the House, and she joined Matt Hall last year in helping MAGA Republicans block some Democratic bills becoming law when Republicans were in the minority. Whitsett's a nutjob, a pure nutjob, who, back during the COVID year, praised Dear Leader's job while thousands of Michiganders died and proclaimed that a horse deworming pill cured her from COVID. And that got her some airtime on Fox News, and she got to talk with Dear Leader. I mean, it worked out for her. But meanwhile, she's hurt the people in her Detroit district, hurt them in more ways than one. And now Karen Whitsett's running for District 7 of the Detroit City Council. Now, she lost in the primary race to longtime community activist and Democratic Socialist Denzel McCampbell, who's also a former spokesperson for Progressive Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. But McCampbell only defeated Karen Whitsett by just over 50 votes. And the two of them will face off again in November for that Detroit City Council seat. And believe me, Karen Whitsett will have lots and will have tons of MAGA power donors backing her to block Denzel McCampbell from getting that council seat. Bridge Detroit's Malachi Barrett recently reported how the 33-year-old McCampbell not only received massive support from progressive groups around the state, but that he's been reaching out to young voters who feel disillusioned and unheard by the political system. Kind of like what Zoran Mamdani is doing in New York City, and doing quite well. He's also received support from unions, including the Detroit AFL-CIO. McCampbell is working to give voice to working-class Detroiters. Karen Whitsett, on the other hand, doesn't care about them. She just cares about getting a paycheck and being the MAGA darling in Detroit. She will block progress, which is going to be her job, blocking progress, just as she's done in the State House. The voters in Detroit made the first step in blocking Karen Whitsett from doing more harm and more damage to Detroit earlier this month, and they can block her for good this November by voting for Denzel McCampbell. Now, finally, who in the Democratic majority in the state Senate will speak up for the voiceless, will speak up for the working class as they have to chop up? They really do. They have to chop up parts of this MAGA House budget. They can't take this as it is. Will Gretchen Whitmer step up to the podium and point out in stark detail how this Matt Hall MAGA House budget is just an extension of the MAGA murder budget passed in Congress this summer? Who will take to the bully pulpit and say no to work requirements, no to the defunding of the Attorney General's office as it fights for the working class and against fascism, and no cuts to education and free meals? Who will take to the bully pulpit and fight to end the corruption in Lansing? Let's see. Let's see if someone's willing to rise to the challenge on the Democratic side. I'm waiting. You're listening to LOL.
He enjoys watching sporting events from years ago. He can recite most of the 1984 Detroit Tigers lineup. He will go to the mat in saying Michigan has produced some of the greatest music in the past 60 years. But most of all, he enjoys the loyalty of a fine dog while sipping on a tasty Michigan beer. Oh, and he loves talking about politics, if you haven't been able to tell yet. It's the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. Need more Pat? Visit and subscribe to leftoflansing.com. Now, back to Pat.
Remember, if you'd ever like to contact me, it's real simple. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. If you have ideas for guests or you have some ideas for some topics that maybe I should be covering that I haven't covered so far, once again, that's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Or if you'd just like to really praise me and say I'm doing a wonderful job, please, you can email me, leftoflansing@gmail.com. Don't forget about our YouTube page. Just look up Left of Lansing on YouTube, and you can find me there. I'm putting up all kinds of video shorts with some commentary that you're not hearing on this podcast. It's separate over there on the YouTube, so check it out. That's Left of Lansing on the YouTube. Okay, before I move on, the Detroit News' Craig Mauger reports that 5 of 20 state agencies did not receive a cut in the Matt Hall MAGA House budget. 2 of those 5 were the legislature, as I already mentioned, and also the governor's office. Something smells like they're trying to butter someone up. It's so crooked, and it's such a joke. And I'd just like to repeat something that I brought up here last week, and that has to do with Governor Whitmer's decision not to call a special election for the state Senate district in 35. That comprises of Bay City or Bay County, Midland County, and Saginaw County. And it was once held by Democrat Kristen McDonald-Rivet, who's now in Congress. I'd like to clarify something that I did not know. I did not know when I talked about this issue last week. If Republicans win that seat, the Senate chamber is tied at 19 Democrats and 19 Republicans. Here's what happens, though. It would be a major victory for Republicans if they won that seat, since all it would take is one Republican to abstain from voting on any Democratic-backed bill in the Senate, and that would eliminate Democratic Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist from being a tie-breaking vote as president in the Senate. I guess it's all a parliamentary thing, but still, That's the rule. However, regardless of that fact, Whitmer displayed, I think, a sign of weakness, and she also displayed fear for MAGA Republicans on this issue. I mean, I get it. I mean, I worked in Saginaw and Bay City and Midland for a number of years in terrestrial radio. That district is a light purple district, and it probably will always be that way, but it was winnable for Democrats. Again, Kristen McDonald-Rivet was the state senator there, a Democrat. Maybe Whitmer, I guess, was calculating on a political level by not calling for the special election right after the November elections. I mean, everything had turned upside down after last November, and maybe she wanted to ensure that Democrats had some kind of control of the Senate for the first couple of months. Fine. But for that seat to be open this long, I'm sorry, it's wrong. And it's politically stupid. It sounds like Whitmer didn't call for a special election immediately because she feared the seat would slip into MAGA Republican hands. And well, here's what happens now. Citizens in that district decided to band together and file a lawsuit against the governor, and a court of claims is giving her, I think, about another week to file a response to the suit. Again, like I said last week, this was horribly played by the governor. She did this out of fear, and like some Democrats, she got afraid after the election rather than staking out a bold vision and some bold language and becoming some kind of a bold opponent to illustrate how Democrats weren't just going to sit back and allow fascism to take over her state. She feared. She played into her fears. She feared that Democrats would lose the seat. In Iowa this week, a Republican state Senate district flipped into Democratic Party hands, snapping the Iowa MAGA Republican supermajority in the state legislature. It was a district that Trump won. That shows that Democrats can win in areas that are light purple or that might even be light blue. With everything that happened with Doge, with everything that happened in the MAGA murder budget, with everything that's happening with the tariffs, MAGA Republicans are vulnerable, and they know it. And that's why Matt Hall and MAGA Republicans sped through their insane and disastrous budget bill this week. That's why Republicans in Texas and other states are resorting to massive gerrymandering. They know they are losing. It was great to read how 3 youth groups connected with the Michigan Democratic Party called on Governor Whitmer to call the special election now. No, not tomorrow, to call the election now. Austin Marsman, chair of the Young Democrats of Michigan and good friend of the show, said in a statement, quote, "It's long past time for Governor Whitmer to call a special election and ensure every Michigander has a voice in our state government." Well, he is right. I mean, it's not a real controversial stance to take, and I love seeing the strength by these young Democratic leaders. Until I read another tweet by Paul Egert of Crane's Business Detroit tonight that read, "The 3 youth arms of the Michigan Democratic Party issued a news release today urging Governor Whitmer to call a special election to fill a vacant Senate seat. They then retracted it hours later." Ugh. That is the wrong call. Devastatingly wrong. They were showing strength there at the beginning of the day, and they walked it back. Somebody did something within the Democratic Party. Like I said last week, you either live by your principles of saying that you want to live in a democracy, or you don't. By delaying the special election, Governor Whitmer is hurting Democrats. The aforementioned Craig Mauger from the Detroit News tweeted this week, "Still very possible not calling the Michigan State Senate special election sooner will ultimately backfire on Democrats." Do you think? He's right. And this could turn out to be a massive, massive mistake by Governor Whitmer. Massive mistake. And it didn't have to be this way. Moving on.
Over the weekend, we learned from the media that Donald Trump has been planning for quite a while now to deploy armed military personnel to the streets of Chicago. This is exactly the type of overreach that our country's founders warned against. And it's the reason that they established a federal system with a separation of powers built on checks and balances. What President Trump is doing is unprecedented and unwarranted. It is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is un-American. Mr. President, do not come to Chicago.
That was Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker telling Dear Leader Trump to keep the National Guard out of the city of Chicago. Now, I spliced together a couple of sound bites there. You can find the full speech on YouTube and I'm sure on various social media sites. But it was refreshing to hear a governor speak with such clarity and some strength. Yeah, he's sounding like I wish our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, would sound like right now. And it got me thinking. When was the last time that Whitmer's given a powerful and inspirational speech? Has she done so in her second term? I mean, I can't think of one. Tell me if I'm missing one, because I seriously cannot think of one right now. When authoritarianism is knocking down the walls of democracy, when the MAGA murder budget combined with tariffs and combined with this atrocious Matt Hall MAGA House bill, I think now would be a good time to let the people know you are on their side and let them know that you are protecting them. You take the bully pulpit and you take the fight to them. It might be a good idea, for instance, to march to downtown Detroit and tell Dear Leader no National Guard troops here in Michigan. It would galvanize and maybe even inspire some. Well, except for Karen Whitsett and current Detroit mayor and so-called independent candidate for governor Mike Duggan, who says he'll reach across the aisle and shake hands with Dear Leader, who will do whatever it takes for the corporate authoritarian crowd. I mean, what are we doing here? But I think my favorite part of Pritzker's speech was where he's promising to prosecute Dear Leader and his regime of lapdogs if he becomes president. Here, I like this part.
This country has survived darker periods than the one that we're going through right now. And eventually, the pendulum will swing back, maybe even next year. Donald Trump has already shown himself to have little regard for the many acolytes that he has encouraged to commit crimes on his behalf. You can delay justice for a time, but history shows you cannot prevent it from finding you eventually. If you hurt my people, nothing will stop me, not time or political circumstance, from making sure that you face justice under our constitutional rule of law.
That was good, because the Trump regime has weaponized its Justice Department and FBI to attack Dear Leader's enemies. The regime is sending tanks down American streets, something I thought used to be the signal of authoritarianism to so-called Republicans out there. Where are the libertarians? I don't even hear from them anymore, but I guess for Republicans, they don't really care. And I think I understand why. Stephen Miller, I sometimes believe, is really running this regime. Do you think it's by some strange or coincidental happenstance that the military is in D.C. or was in L.A. and is threatening to send troops into Baltimore or Chicago? This isn't because the mayors are black in those cities, is it? I mean, Stephen Miller knows a lot of MAGA white Christian nationalist voters, and he knows this will satisfy them so much. I mean, you know they'll love seeing those tanks rolling through diverse cities across the country. Sure, they can't get meaningful health care, like I said, or decent wages anymore, but it's great theater to watch the military marching through American cities. I mean, it's not solving so-called crime, and it is antithetical to everything we fought against the British during the Revolutionary War. And again, it's being done by Stephen Miller, who loves punishing black and brown people. It's hurting local businesses and restaurants in D.C., but who cares, right? I mean, who cares? Even worse, it's stripping away local autonomy, and it's stripping away states' rights. You remember hearing MAGA Republicans lecture all of us on states' rights before, right? Well, I don't hear that anymore. That's why I want to highlight a bill that was introduced here in the Michigan State House by another good friend of the show, Democratic State Representative Lori Pohitsky of Livonia.
My bill to prohibit the deployment of an armed military force from another state, territory, or district here in Michigan without the governor's approval or a valid, the key word being valid, order from the president. Our country is experiencing a constitutional crisis, spurred by the lawless actions of the United States chief executive and emboldened by federal congressional Republicans that refuse to act. It's imperative that we give the states and our courts every tool available to push back against authoritarianism, and that is what this bill aims to do. The federalization and deployment of National Guard troops into LA and Washington, D.C. represents an unprecedented abuse of executive power, one that runs counter to the very foundations of our country. As elected leaders, we cannot allow these actions to go unchecked.
She's one of the good ones in our state house. Representative Pohutsky's bill would, as you heard her say, block out-of-state National Guard members from entering Michigan without the governor's approval or valid orders from the president. So far, there's been no valid reason for Dear Leader calling in troops to harass and harm citizens in American cities that he doesn't like. And that's fascism again. I mean, there's already a federal law banning presidents from sending in troops without a governor's approval or for a valid reason. And Pohutsky understands there is really no way to fight back against this on a state legislative front, but she wants her bill to help give state courts the power to push back a bit. Now, let me guess. The pro-don't tread on me people, the pro-local control party, the pro-states' rights MAGA Republicans will enthusiastically back this bill for its true connection with the values and the Constitution of this country. Okay, not going to happen. Not with Matt Hall in control of the State House. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due here. I've been hammering former Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris and her campaign staff, which I still think ran one of the worst campaigns in history. It's a lesson of how standing up for little while running towards the so-called corporate middle failed all of us as a country. We are paying for it with the Trump regime. But Vice President Harris said this in her final campaign speech, and she was right. She said Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. Well, I mean, as he said this week.
Not that I don't have the right to do anything I want to do. I'm the president of the United States. If I think our country's in danger, and it is in danger in these cities, I can do it.
And who's going to stop him? Who is going to stop him? Who's putting up a forceful challenge? Pritzker is one of the few Democrats doing so, I guess, thus far, but more are needed. I mean, this week we watched Dear Leader announce that he was removing Federal Reserve Board Governor Lisa Cook over some unproven claim of mortgage fraud. Her crime, apparently, is that she owns 2 houses. And let's not forget that Dear Leader was found guilty on 34 felony counts of financial fraud. We are through the looking glass sometimes. Now, as Kyle Davidson from Michigan Advance notes, under the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, governors can only be removed, quote unquote, for cause. Here's the thing, though. No for cause has been offered by the regime in this instance. It's a blatant authoritarian grab to get control of the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be an independent arm of the government, but they want that control under Dear Leader's control. They want it under the regime's control. Fire Lisa Cook and then insert some other unqualified Trump lapdog into the position. Kind of like how Dear Leader and Robert Kennedy have blown up the Centers for Disease Control to reflect Kennedy's worm-eaten, non-scientific, mushy-brain mind, and it's going to kill people. It must be noted that Lisa Cook is not only a former professor of economics and international relations at Michigan State University, but she served under President Obama, and then President Biden appointed her to the Fed board a couple of years ago. She seemed highly qualified to just about anyone, but to Stephen Miller and Dear Leader Trump, attacking the first black woman to serve on the Fed seemed quite perfect for them, almost too perfect. And look, I have to say this too. We progressives, we are doing ourselves a disservice if we downplay the role race and gender are playing with this regime. I've been seeing on social media this week some complaining that it shouldn't be noted that Lisa Cook is the first black woman on the Federal Reserve. No, it's got to be, because you see, the regime wants to end DEI programs because they view it as anti-white. Yes, not every person voted for Dear Leader over Stephen Miller's views on race, but a healthy portion of them did. That fact cannot be ignored, everyone. It can't. Now, Lisa Cook is filing a lawsuit against the Trump regime over its illegal firing, and she's promising to fulfill her role at the Federal Reserve. She's not going anywhere. She's not backing down. Good to see someone with some backbone here, because this is about Trump trying to take over the Fed so the Fed will lower interest rates, which is something current Fed Chair Jerome Powell already hinted this week would probably happen, and it's happening because the American economy is in shambles. Once again, by Dear Leader Trump. So good on Lisa Cook on fighting back. And speaking of fighting back, Democratic voters are making their voices loud and clear over their disapproval of this country's constant shoveling of billions and billions of dollars to Israel so it can continue to conduct its genocide on the Palestinian people. Even more, so the extreme right-wing government of Israel can continue to also take land in the West Bank. Democratic voters that are against that. Progress Michigan revealed this week in a poll that 45% of residents surveyed strongly supported relief efforts in Gaza, with 24% saying they somewhat supported aid efforts. 11% of Michiganders surveyed somewhat opposed sending aid to Gaza, while another 11% strongly opposed to aid efforts. 11% strongly opposed to giving people aid. Despicable. According to that Progress Michigan poll, of Democratic voters in Michigan, 67% of them backed offering strong support to Gaza. Now, that coincides with the Quinnipiac poll that states that 75% of Democrats and 66% of independents oppose sending more military aid to Israel in a war with Hamas. 77% of Democrats and 51% of independents think Israel is committing a genocide. But despite those numbers, the Democratic National Committee couldn't do the right thing this week. A DNC panel failed to push through a resolution calling for an arms embargo on Israel and a recognition of Palestinian statehood. The DNC just couldn't do it. It decided to buck most of its base. Instead, the DNC agreed to form a task force to figure out how to adequately find some mushy political middle ground while a genocide is happening. How's that leadership? How's that leadership? By the way, Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib remains one of just 14 House Democrats to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide perpetrated by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. No other Democratic congressperson from Michigan or either of our two Democratic senators can speak the truth. They are afraid to call this what it is. It is a genocide. What is going on here? And Democrats wonder why voters are searching for new blood to represent them. You're listening to LOL.
A podcast that believes in using common sense to move Michigan into the future. And by common sense, we mean progressive sense. We've all seen what 40 years of Republican leadership did to this state, and we refuse to go back. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. You can follow Pat on Facebook or X. Pat still calls it Twitter. Or on the Gram, Threads, and also on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. All right, I think we gave Pat enough time to catch his breath. Let's get back to it. Here's Pat Johnston.
Hey, please make sure to subscribe to the Left of Lansing wherever you're listening, and please make sure to give it a nice 5-star review. Subscriptions are hugely important to us here in podcast land, and let others know about Michigan's premier progressive podcast. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. Podcaster and influencer Taylor Lorenz wrote a piece for Wired.com titled, "A Dark Money Group is Secretly Funding High-Profile Democratic Influencers." And as Lorenz begins in her piece, in a private group chat in June, dozens of Democratic political influencers discussed whether to take advantage of an enticing opportunity. They were being offered $8,000 per month to take part in a secretive program aimed at bolstering Democratic messaging on the internet. But the contract sent to them from Chorus, the nonprofit arm of a liberal influencer marketing platform, came with some strings. Among other issues, it mandated extensive secrecy about disclosing their payments and had restrictions on what sort of political content the creators could produce. Okay, so this Chorus is funded by a dark money group called the 1630 Fund, and it contacted some 90 so-called Democratic or progressive influencers. However, it basically got to call the shots of what these influencers could say, and they'd have to share all their political guests, be it, politicians or strategists or whatever. They'd have to share all that information with everyone else in this group. And that apparently left some of these podcasters and influencers feeling like they really did not own their content. And listen to this paragraph by Ms. Lorenz in Wired. Creators in the program are not allowed to use any funds or resources that they receive as part of the program to make content that supports or opposes any political campaign without express authorization from Chorus in advance and in writing per the contract. No, 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 no. Look, I get that the 1630 Dark Money Group, which according to Miss Lorenz has a couple of big money backers, and that can really entice some podcasters who might really need some money. But here's the other part. These influencers who take the money and agree to be part of this course group, they can't disclose where they get their funding. Now that's wrong. And let me repeat, these content creators must push the Democratic Party line. Now, I mention this story because I always want you knowing that I will never, ever do such a thing. I started this little show after my escape from right-wing corporate terrestrial radio, where every little thing I said was sliced and diced and dissected and torn apart. You can't say this, Pat, because we'll lose our business leader support. You can't say this, Pat, because we'll lose the Chamber of Commerce support. You can't say that, Pat, because we'll lose Republican listeners, and on and on and on. Look, it wasn't my station, and the company had every right to tamp down my free speech, while also telling everybody they believed in free speech, of course. But once I escaped, I decided to put my money, my time, my energy, my voice to get this show off the ground and to use my progressive voice without the fear of receiving a tongue lashing from the boss, or bosses for that matter. And as you've heard here plenty of times, including this time, I'll call out established corporate Democrats when I think they're going wrong. So you will always get someone who calls them like he sees them. You might not always agree with me, and maybe you'll agree just 50% of what I have to say in a specific episode, but you'll always get the real me, all right? You will get me, and you'll never have to worry about me being bought off by some dark money group to push a corporate agenda. I hope that you're getting that by now. However, I am thinking about starting a Patreon page because, I wouldn't mind having a little money to pay for a beer once I'm finished recording an episode. I wouldn't mind a little something for the effort.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wander Beats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Left of Lansing. Everyone have a safe and great Labor Day weekend, and remember how those unions and those fighting for workers' rights gave us this holiday. Let me know what you think of the show by emailing leftoflansing@gmail.com. I'll be back again next week with another edition of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. Also, the college football season starts in earnest here this weekend, so here are my predictions for Michigan and Michigan State football. I think Michigan rediscovers the forward pass this year, and it'll help them win a couple more games this year as they will finish 9-3. And as for the Spartans, I think Jonathan Smith's a good coach, and he makes the Green and White Bowl eligible this year with a 6-6 record. So you heard it here first. Well, you probably didn't, or you probably don't care. Until next week, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.